Good afternoon and welcome to the YWCA Lower Cape Fears Talk on Race. It has been so long. It feels like it's been so long since we have started the series over, but I am so glad that we are back. This fall series of Talk on Race is going to center around women. It's going to center around our women's choices, lifting up her voice and giving her light. So this month in September, we're having a conversation with our two amazing panelists about Roe v. Wade, followed by in October, we will be going in person on October 20th at 6:00 p.m. And we will have that conversation about giving her a voice and lifting up the voices of survivors of domestic violence. And also having a conversation about bridging some gaps between the community advocates, survivors, and the police department. And then we'll be ending this series in November about giving her a light, talking about BIPOC women and the intersectionality of their lives. So again, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, we are going to start with our land acknowledgement. The YWCA Lower Cape Fear serves people located within the Lower Cape Fear region. This land once thrived with life from indigenous peoples known today as the Cape Fear Indians and the Waccamaw Siouan Indian people, living in established settlements along the Cape Fear River and Lake Waccamaw, along with many other established sites in the region. We need to protect and honor the history of these places. Indigenous people are not relics of the past. They are still here, continuing to demonstrate their talents and gifts amidst a backdrop of ongoing colonialism and oppression. They are worth celebrating. We hope our land acknowledgement statement will inspire others to stand with us in solidarity with Native nations. Again, welcome to Talk on Race, and I would love for my panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll go right into our conversation today. We'll start with Megan.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Richardson. I am the Associate Director of the Health Promotion Office at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. Our Health Promotion Office oversees all of the health education, events, activities, programs that occur on campus. So we cover a variety of health topics that are relevant to the college population, and reproductive rights, reproductive justice being included in that. So I'm very excited to be with you all today.
Thank you so much. And Dana.
Hey everybody, I am Dana Stachowiak. I am currently the director of the Gender Studies and Research Center at UNCW, and I'm also an associate professor of curriculum studies. And in my position in the Gender Studies and Research Center, most of the work that we do centers around gender justice. And we also oversee the Women's Genders and Sexualities minor and the post-bac certificate. We also do programming on campus. We have a program called Front Porch Forums on Gender Justice, where we go out into the community or bring the community to us and have conversations around gender justice, empowering women, empowering trans people, and talking about gender inclusivity.
Yes, so thank you for those introductions. And the first thing I would like to start with is a statement from the YWCA. And yeah, I'm going to start with that. So first I'm going to share my screen. This statement can be found on the ywca.org/Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade. For the last 5 decades, armed with the knowledge that the right to determine their reproductive future was protected by Roe, young women and others who are able to become pregnant have had the ability to invest in their futures, be it through education, training, vocation, career, and anything in between. We know that abortion bans push young people out of the workplace and limit their educational opportunities and careers, with lifelong consequences that can and will impact economic stability and opportunity for themselves and their families. For people of color, those consequences are more severe due to existing systematic racial inequities. YWCA has supported access to abortion for more than 50 years, most recently to ensure the experiences and voices of young people are heard by the Supreme Court. YWCA proudly submitted an amicus or friend of the court brief in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, the case that ultimately overturned Roe v. Wade. This brief clearly outlines why YWCA USA firmly believes that access to abortion is a fundamental right. In a response to this devastating decision by the court, YWCA USA CEO Margaret Mitchell issued this statement. Today, we are in solidarity with advocates, leaders, parents, survivors of violence, allies, and everyone who believes that abortion is a fundamental right. Join our call to Congress to pass the Women's Health Protection Act, which would codify protection for abortion and remove burdensome and often medically unnecessary restrictions, including mandatory ultrasounds, waiting periods, bias counseling, and irrelevant medical testing. For more than 50 years, the YWCA USA has supported the reproductive freedom of all people to make fundamental decisions about whether and when to have children. We are striving to create a world in which all women, especially women of color, are free from racism, sexism, and can thrive. We refuse to sit on the sidelines during this historic moment. For more than 50 years, again, the YWCA has supported the rights for abortion. So again, I welcome my panelists to join me again, and that is the YWCA's stance, that is the YWCA's response to the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And so the first thing I would say, I am able to work for an organization that is so very outspoken about this issue. And when I first heard that the rumors of Roe v. Wade, I personally did not take it serious. I just didn't think in the year of 2020 that this would still be a topic that will come up. But at the leadership conference at the YWCA, YWCA USA CEO said to us, we need to be thinking about what's going to happen when it's overturned. And there was a gasp in the room, like, really? I don't think we really thought that this would happen, but the leak really was a preparation period for organizations like mine, organizations like Planned Parenthood, other organizations who are advocates for women's rights to choose and birthing people's rights to choose. And I think when it happened, I was very shocked. I just was like, I was shocked. And then my next response is, what does this mean for communities of color? What does this mean for our country? What does the overturning, what does it do? What does it mean? And that was kind of my initial response. I didn't have any solutions. I know there were people that were downtown that had their signs, but even I didn't know, what do I put on the sign? What do I put on the shirt? What do I do from here was kind of my initial response. So I'm really interested in how you both responded when it overturned. What was their initial shock or was there initial anger? I think I was mad, the audacity. But I would love for you to share kind of maybe the just initial reactions.
Yeah, and I don't mind going first. Very similar to you, shocked, and it wasn't expected when the initial draft leaked. That had never happened before with the Supreme Court. So that in itself was already shocking. And then the fact that this could happen, this overturning might happen. I've never lived before Roe v. Wade was in place. I've heard stories. We talked about this a little bit before getting on the call, but you've heard about the back alley abortions. You've heard about women throwing themselves down the stairs to terminate a pregnancy. And so a sense of fear came across me, just the not knowing what's going to happen next, and also the thought of, why is this the issue that we're in right now? There's so many other things going on. Why are the rights of women and people who can give birth being politicized so heavily? And as we've seen through the last several years, this has been in the works for a while. I think a lot of us did not realize that. But as the court system has started to move towards a more conservative lean, it's been in the works. And so very disappointed, but also not completely surprised that this is where we are. But again, disappointed more than anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you both. When I was thinking about this question before we came on, it's like that feeling of disbelief, but also not really. I was like, no, actually, like I wanted to in my head think that this wouldn't happen, but I also knew like just the way that things have been happening and what we've watched for the last several years happen to lead up to this, it was like disbelief and shock, but also like, nah, this makes sense. And I immediately, so I think my initial feelings were that feelings of disappointment, but also just immense fear of like, what's next, who's next, and what does this mean for the empowerment and the entitlement of different classes of people who this empowers and entitles and privileges, right? Even further, what is that going to do to what we already have, this turmoil like we already have in our country along those lines? And then thinking of what's next, of if we overturn this so easily, all of the other protections that have followed, what's going to happen there? So I identify as queer and I'm also trans, and I can think of the, marriage rights, is that going to be overturned, or is certain gender affirming care going to be overturned, and all of this, or are things going to be, what are we going to roll back on, and then who are we going to further oppress? So I think that fear is just kind of where I've sat. It was the initial, and that's where I've kind of sat.
Yeah, and I think I definitely agree with the fear. Working, at the YWCA, we see all of this research about, when we look at health disparities, we know that, when we're looking at health disparities, heart disease, high blood pressure, all of the other things, access to healthcare, we know that it disproportionately affects communities of color, Black and Brown. And so when I was thinking about like, what could this mean, and what does this impact look like, I saw that the Legal Defense Fund, they released a study that says since 1970s, following Roe v. Wade, it led to a 9.6 increase in Black women's college graduation rate and a 6.9 increase in Black women's labor market. And so, like, my first fear was like about access and what is this going to do to the health of Black women? But what I did not think about was what the Legal Defense Fund said about college rates and about the labor market. Like, the Roe v. Wade led to an increase for Black women, right? Which, if we look across the charts, there's not a lot of increase for Black women, but there was an increase in college graduation rate as well as the labor market. And so I'm really interested in how do you think what will your impact look like in your industries of education, especially because it directly aligns with that. And I know right now, especially at UNCW, increasing the graduation rate and the enrollment rate of students of color, both Black, Brown, and Indigenous, and multi-ethnic and multiracial, is not on an increase, it's on a decline. So what is that going to look like? What impact do you think you may see there?
Yeah, so like you just mentioned, this directly affects those rates of enrollment. So many women, because of Roe v. Wade have been able to go to school, have been able to see their economic power grow, their roles in the workforce grow. So I think people forget that it's not just the abortion debate. There's so many other things that come along with this. And so with my role being a health educator and overseeing the Health Education Center here, we really try to empower our students to be able to take charge of their health, to make their own health decisions. And that's what really terrifies me about this ruling is how do we educate students on making the best bodily decision and that bodily autonomy when the Supreme Court or the government as a whole is saying, no, this is what you have to do. So trying to figure all of that out, that's super scary. And it's going to affect all of us in one way or another.
Yeah, I think this is a good example, or not a good example, it's actually a terrible example, but the reversal of the rights reinforces white supremacy and structural racism, right? And so I think as somebody who, my office isn't political by any means. Some people like to say that it is, but we think about rights at large, and we think about pushing back against white supremacy. We think about pushing back against sexism and homophobia and racism and classism and all those things. That's part of our intersectional community and our intersectional programming that we've started here. And a couple of things I worry about are, well, how quickly are they going to eliminate our center? How quickly are they going to want to eliminate then our program? We have seen an increase in the number of students enrolling in our program, in the Women's Genders and Sexuality Studies program, but that given the political nature of things right now, what's going on, there might be more, but there's always a fight to try to get rid of our center. There's been, historically, there's been that. So I worry about that. But one thing that's on the other side of it, kind of a little positive, hopeful thinking is, well, I sure hope this also empowers women and makes them, or empowers men and women and trans and non-binary folks to want to be in a women's genders and sexuality studies program, because we teach how to advocate for the things that Megan's talking about, right? In health promotion, advocating for ourselves, making choices for our bodies. And even if we don't necessarily agree with certain laws that are taking place, or we don't agree with certain things that people want to do with their lives, what the WGS program does in a lot of our classes is talks about, well, how can we look at things from a socially just way? And how can we think about our voting rights? And how can we vote and think responsibly as citizens? It's really a big part of the social justice aspect of our program. So part of me has those same fears of, our enrollment, this is going to affect our enrollment. But also I'm hopeful that the students who we have here, particularly our young white women who we have on campus, right? That's the majority of our students, that those also want to come into these programs. But I'm nervous about how quickly are they going to try to eliminate programs like ours, because essentially taking away women's rights to choose, it's this control of women's rights, and we deal a lot with that in my office, is women's rights to choose education, access, and things like that.
Yeah, and I think, what you have put on the table does give me hope, because I went to Bennett College for Women. So shout out to Bennett, but it's one of two all women's colleges, and they specifically, educate women of color. And women's studies, gender studies, womanism, feminism, Black feminism was very much a part of just the curriculum. And what I realized is taking classes in gender studies, it does give you a perspective of advocating. It gives you a perspective of like, oh, well, if I want autonomy over my body, why do I have a say in the autonomy of someone else's body, right? Like, it gives you the avenue to open up your mind to thinking in different ways. And a lot of times we then become the advocates. We then become the lobbyists. We then become, the women who speak up in the meeting and say, that was sexist, and like, I won't tolerate that. We become, the HR representatives that say, no, we need more inequity in our systems. And so, Dana, I absolutely agree. Like, I also hope that some young people and people in college are going to look at this and say, like, we're not going to do this on my watch. So, like, yes, it may have been overturned by the Supreme Court, but that also means that like that it's not illegal in the whole United States. Like I still have some say, I still have some rights, I can still take some action steps. And so I really do hope that what you see is kind of what's unexpected, that there is an increase of enrollment, you know, in the program so that people, even people who are curious, like, why is this a big deal? You know, or people who are also against it, like, you know, against people's access to abortion, that they begin to kind of read and explore, because I believe like education is really going to be the way into some of the hearts, into some of the minds of community members who may not completely understand. The other thing I think you push on is about some of these misconceptions, like of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Like some people feel like, well, we're saving a life, right? Or, you know, we are saying that like people can't use it to their advantage, you know, which I don't know anybody personally who is like, yeah, sign me up. This is what I want to do like every year, you know, like those are the misconceptions, right, about abortions. And like we've talked about two of the misconceptions. Access to education is a misconception. Access to healthcare. One thing that I will also read is that like when the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the White House press secretary, she slammed the new law, saying that this is just another radical step to take away women's reproductive rights and freedom and put personal health care decisions in the hands of politicians rather than women and their doctors. And so, you know, my question that I'm always asking is, why is my body politicized? Whether my body is a body of a Black woman, whether it's a body of a mother. But, you know, like my reproductive right should be a conversation between myself and my primary caregiver, right? Not the Supreme Court. Like as I'm sitting in the doctor's office saying, do I want to have another child? And they're saying, well, let's look at your blood pressure. Let's look at your sugar level. Let's look at, you know, what's going on with you health-wise. Like, let's take into all of these things into consideration. Like, why has this health choice between my body and my partner, why has it become this politicized agenda again? Or maybe what are your thoughts on as to why, or I'll put it out there.
I'm sure Dana can speak to this much better than I can, but one thing I definitely did not realize until more recent years was that abortion wasn't even as politically charged as it is today. Before Roe v. Wade, politicians started to hinge their platforms on the abortion topic to start to appeal to certain groups of voters, especially those who have religious leanings when it comes to the rightness, I guess, of the abortion topic. So that was so interesting to me because for a very long time, this wasn't as big of a deal, I guess, as it has become politically. So it's really been used, abortion as a whole has been used as a vehicle, as a movement to push forward a lot of political agendas. And that's just, as a health educator, that's so unfortunate. I feel like as a whole, sex has been really demonized in our culture, when really sex is a normal part of the human experience. We all have hormones, we all go through these things. So there's nothing wrong with sex, but I think it's so easy for politicians, we live in a patriarchal society, for them to make these decisions that don't, they think at least, don't directly affect them, when in reality, abortion affects in one way or another everyone that's involved. It's not just the woman or the birthing partner that experiences it. So personally, I feel like politicians have really utilized this to push forward their own agendas. And that's just, again, something that's really disappointing to me.
So as a health educator, when you're talking to young people who may be afraid of sex, because like, what if I don't want to be in a position where like I have to choose, and you're saying, you know, like, how do you begin to educate? And it's not just young people, right? It's anybody in the birthing age. How do you begin to educate them on, you know, on sex, and like the fact that like people are supposed to have this enjoyable experience, and now like all of the outcomes, are politicized. Like, how do you then begin to educate? Like, where do you start?
Mhm. With empowerment. That's really how I start my conversations with my students, letting them know that at the end of the day, this is your body. I try to expose them to the whole range of sexual health. So talking about abstinence, but also talking about how to have difficult conversations with partners. What does the consent conversation look like?
That's
And just going back to the fact that you make the decision of what you want. And there's been so much stigma, there's been so much shame ingrained in our society. And I think with each generation, we're starting to see our younger people feel that empowerment more and more. I think because of social media, Google, all of the resources that are available to them, they're much more able to educate themselves and not necessarily go by what their parents may have taught them from birth, or what the society as a whole has taught them. So I think by giving them as many tools and resources as possible to make their own conclusions is the best path forward, and the one that we try to teach out of my office.
And I would also add, and then providing them the tools for contraceptives, right? To also empower them to say, like, here are condoms, and here are, dental dams, and here are all of these things that, are important and can keep you safe, not just from, possible potential unwanted pregnancies or, ectopic pregnancies or anything, but also like STDs and STIs and, all of those other things as well. And I think, the one thing that I hope is that as our country is kind of trying to figure out where to go from here, is that like that access isn't taken away. Because, there was a time, I think, where like some schools couldn't pass out condoms, even though the kids were sexually active. I think, when we think about just how much, and I agree, like it's not even just abortions in our bodies, but also how sex is politicized and sometimes fetishized as well. We have to help young people understand how to use all of their tools and how to give them the easiest and best and most effective access as possible so that they also feel empowered.
Right. Yeah, definitely. We offer free condoms, free dental dams, all of that within our health promotion office here, as well as the Student Health Center. And we offer birth control options there as well. And I have so many students that come in and they have no idea what these things are, because they've never been exposed to it before. And comprehensive sex education just doesn't exist in our society, unfortunately. And so we talk about systems and how all these different things are playing a role later on. And if we have students who do not receive great sex education in their younger school years, and then come to university and now they're exposed to everything and the party culture and just people they've never been around before, and just this newfound freedom, we have the obligation to make sure we're going over what resources and tools are available to them, because they just haven't had that before. And so that's one of the really great things that I love about the work that we do, is we can have those conversations with our students, and you see that light bulb moment when things start to go off and connect for them. And we try to make the conversation normal. No, there's no shame. If you come in and go to our sexual health buffet, is what we call it, we don't ask you any questions. If you want to talk to us, you can, but we're not going to, stay over you and ask you, what are you here for, or anything like that. We want it to be a normal part of using our services. And we love providing that for the students.
Yeah. And I that is an idea that, we will maybe have here as well, about like how can we also take a stance and stand in solidarity of helping with health education, because I think a part of understanding the YWCA stance on having good access to abortions, or healthy access, or access at all, is because the YWCA feels that having access is a health right. As much as going to the doctor and getting a pap smear, or going to the doctor and getting a mammogram. Like, having access to good health care, is important. And a lot of times for communities of color, for people of color who live at or below poverty or in concentrated poverty, there is a lack of health access, a lack of health education, a lack of even sometimes trust and belief. We can see studies about pain, right? We can see studies about partner violence. And that's the other thing about the YWCA's, link between reproductive justice and our conversation today is that the YWCA is the largest network of domestic violence service providers. And we see that there's a deep connection between sexual violence and also abortions. And so abortion bans unnecessary trigger things for survivors who are already trying to heal from having their bodily autonomy attacked or having their body autonomies taken advantage of and being abused. And so when you're saying to a woman, we want to take away your access, you're also a lot of times talking to women who've already had their access taken away. I don't know if that makes sense or not. I don't know, Dana or Megan, do you see any of this with domestic violence survivors? Like, have you seen a link between sometimes needing health access and then also being sexually violated or abused?
Yeah, absolutely. That's not my wheelhouse here. We actually have the care office on campus that deals with intimate partner violence. And so they'd be better equipped to answer that question. But we definitely see that among our students needing help in both realms. And then sometimes they don't even know how to access it on campus because it's the first time they've ever had access and they don't even know what they need access to, right? But we have, like, the US has this long history of denying access and politicizing bodies that are minoritized bodies. So we have a long and violent history of that in the US. So it's not surprising to me. Like, if I think about why women's bodies are being politicized now, I think it's never stopped. And I think when we're denying access to healthcare, and then this reaches into denying access to bodily autonomy or denying access to services in IPV situations, that's a direct reflection of how society views women and still views women, then especially how we view women of color. And so we've had this long history of politicizing all minoritized bodies, but especially bodies of women of color. I think even in thinking about our own history in Wilmington in 1898, right? We don't talk about it. We don't talk about it at all, right? We are now, thankfully, Wilmington starting to talk about 1898. But one of the things we don't talk about is how women's bodies, white women's bodies especially, were politicized in 1898 to help with the coup, right? Like it was like, oh, white women's bodies are in danger, right? So we've seen this even with our own history here in Wilmington. But then at the same time politicizing Black men's bodies, that because they were stronger, they're maybe bigger, they're gonna overtake white women, and right. And so we also see in thinking about the Dobbs decision here and overturning Roe versus Wade. And as we talked about that question earlier of what might this look like what is this coming down the pipeline? Who else is going to be affected by this? LGBTQ rights, I think of trans rights. We also politicize trans bodies. There's a lot of anti-trans legislation happening right now. Even thinking also of intimate partner violence. We had a front porch forum with DVSS, the Domestic Violence Shelter and Services here last year, talking about how we don't talk enough about the different communities that need support that aren't getting those, and we're taking that away more and more. And as we talk about, well, education is the key, you made the statement, and we all agree that education really is what we need here. We need to start amping that up. But education's seen as a threat. Like, this seems, the more Black women are going to college and university and working and building their educational base, the more threatening that is to white, cisgender, Christian, able-bodied men, right? All privileged people. And so it's not, when we think that politicians don't know what's at stake. They don't, but they do know what's at stake for taking away their power, right? Essentially. So if there are more Black educated women out in this world, that is a direct threat, right? And we also fail to talk about that, right? When we think about talking about systemic racism and the patriarchy, is where it also comes down to, if Roe v. Wade overturned equates to less women being educated, then that means less women in power. That means less threat to men. And so this has just been it's just cyclical, right? We're trying to come back around, and now people have been emboldened and empowered based on our Supreme Court leaning more conservative, and now they're emboldened and empowered, and I think we're going to see this, and it's up to us to educate and push forward to keep making these changes.
Yeah, you said a whole lot right there. In that word. No, I think, to think about how, the overturn of Roe v. Wade is essentially, upholding white supremacy, which is essentially saying, like, anything other, we don't want you in power. Even though when we look at the stats, like, it's like such a small percentage of people who are still in that category. And then the threat of losing power is such a fear that is so untrue, right? Because we can look at economic data, we can look at what's the other one? I know economic data. We can also look at like workplace environment. We can look at all of these other stats that says when you have people that reflect all of the community and not one part of the community, more money is happening. People have a better quality of life. They live longer. Their kids are happier. They're well educated. Like all of these things saying like there's actually not a loss of power that is actually at stake here. And so I just wanted to speak to that. And then I think the other thing about, how white women's bodies are politicized. I'm not a white woman, so I can't speak to that. But I definitely can speak to the fact that you are absolutely right. Like there was this whole image of like the white woman is fragile and she needs to be protected. It's also politicizing her body as much as it is politicizing the body of a Black woman, saying we want to take away all your rights. And I really, can see in this moment, a couple of weeks ago, there was a fundraiser for the abortion fund here in Wilmington, and it was held at Bull City Cider. And I got to see so many organizations come together. And that was just such a wonderful moment. Like some of everybody was in the room, but to see all of these people saying like, we stand in solidarity against all of the stereotypes. And we all stand in solidarity to say like, we stand with women. I would love to thank Marla for her hard work with that. And Dana, your students were there. WOW was there, Women Organizing in Wilmington was there. Of course, we were there, YWCA, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated were there. I mean, there were so many just different organizations that said like, hey, women deserve to have autonomy and to make choices over their bodies. I don't know, Megan, did you have anything you wanted to jump in and say?
No, I think you all covered it all, but I think you made a really great point about different organizations and everyone coming together. And one thing I like to mention as well is this isn't just going to affect women or people that can give birth. It really does affect everyone. And so it's broader than that. I feel like that's taken out of the conversation a lot of times. Men have probably benefited more from Roe v. Wade being in place than they realize. And so that's a really important thing to highlight as well. And they should also be on the front lines with the women in our fight against this.
So I do want to, go ahead, Dan.
But,
No, you're good.
Well, I did want to, just kind of make sure the distinction was there. I don't know if I was clear, like white women's bodies have been politicized in ways that they're gentle and they're fragile, and Black women's, brown women's bodies have been that they're not, that they're dangerous, that they're bad. And what I think is scary for me, I mean, I didn't live during Roe v. Wade, I wasn't alive then, but what's scary for me right now to see is the disconnect, how even like, especially with religious organizations, like white women are coming together, we're seeing that are saying this is this is empowering women. This is because it's taking care of us. It's making sure we're healthier. But it's empowering women in the same way that we saw in 1998, especially white women, they feel empowered and they feel like they're a part of a cause. And so this is getting them excited to, oh, well, I can make these decisions and this is a cause that I really care about. And we're not seeing how we're actually turning against other women of color, trans women, non-binary people who can give birth, right? And so I think that's a scary piece for me, is that it's doing one thing to one group of women and one thing to another group of women, empowering them to do things that are not seeing how, when we come together, as we spoke, that things are stronger. Economics are stronger, healthcare is stronger, socio-political climate is stronger, work environment stronger. But I think this is taking away from that, because it's also then, this is not just pitting, cisgender men against cisgender women, but also women, if we think intersectionally, race, class, all of that, is pitting everybody against everybody else. And I think that's a real danger here, is that, and thinking about, it doesn't just impact women, it impacts everyone. I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I would say is that, I too have definitely heard the voices of like, we are saving women and this is gonna provide things. But when we look at the statistics of how Black women, Brown women, American Indian, Alaska Native women are dying 3 to 4 times higher than white women during childbirth, we know that banning abortion is going to strip medical professionals and pregnant people, including those beyond 15 weeks, of making those decisions. And that is only going to further exacerbate the crisis of the Black, and we're calling it the Black maternal health issues, right? That Black women, they go in hospitals and, we know of, and they are dying while trying to give birth. And the ban on abortion could ultimately lead to the increase of seeing more Black, Brown, and Indigenous women dying during childbirth. So sometimes when I'm hearing the rhetoric of, like this is going to give women access to healthcare, like it hasn't. And the access that Black, Brown, and Indigenous women have had to healthcare at this point has still also been very detrimental to our health. So taking us back to the 1970s, when like women were sterilized, going into the doctors for a pap smear, or just going to have children, they were sterilized during C-sections. So like some of the ways in which healthcare or health access have worked for white women, it has not worked for all women of color. Like it just hadn't. And so the additional fear that sometimes goes through my head is, what is this going to look like for women of color when they are actually deciding to even give birth? Like that could also be detrimental to their health.
Yeah, and I think one thing to highlight too is data shows that when carried out safely, an abortion poses less risk to a person's health than does carrying a baby to full term. And when we look at those Black maternal health rates and the mortality rates, these are only going to increase if we continue to restrict abortion access. And you kind of highlighted this a little bit earlier, Janika, as well. We might lose medical professionals who can no longer practice abortion in the state and have to take their expertise elsewhere. And people also forget that the procedure for abortion is very similar to what you would do for somebody that is experiencing a miscarriage. And we know that miscarriage rates are also very high, especially within women of color. And so we're going to be losing those healthcare providers who can care for women going through this. And I think that that's not talked about enough. And there's just so much that's at stake beyond just this one decision. There's so many little things that are going to come about as a result as well.
Go ahead, Dana.
No, I was just going to say, this is Megan, this is where I don't know this health side of it, so you speak up, please. Yes. But I'm really glad you brought that up. I was in Charlotte this weekend and picked up their Charlotte Observer yesterday, and right on the front page, there's a thing that says North Carolina abortion restrictions could spook prospective OBGYNs. And that, Megan, I'm sure this was familiar to you. You already thought about that. I hadn't thought about it either. And the article was so telling of like, we're gonna lose also our doctors of color, right? Because there's gonna be less. This woman specifically said, I went to Duke specifically because it's in North Carolina and abortion illegal and all these things. And I didn't know that abortion doctors or that not abortion doctors, that doctors or OBGYNs have to practice a number of or do a number of abortions before they can get their or those types of procedures to get their license. And they're talking about if they have what's going to happen with these medical fields. Duke is fantastic, but what's going to happen to people who are wanting to come here but saying, but then I'm going to have to travel out of state to learn how to do this part of my medical degree. But then speaking to that point of there's so much mistrust in the medical field for women and women of color, but especially women of color, because we have such a violent history. Like, I find comfort as a trans person. Most of my doctors are people of color, and because I want to support people of color, but also because I feel more comfortable. Like, we understand this, like there's a fear going to doctors and there's a fear being in medical situations when your body is not a body that's appreciated, or your body's been used in violent ways in spaces that are supposed to be safe. And I think about it's less access, not just to healthcare, but less access to healthcare that feels safe, where I can look into the eyes of my doctor. One of my doctors here is Constance Foreman, and I go to her specifically because it feels so safe to tell her things that I wouldn't, because there's this understanding. And just the thought of, when I read that article, the thought of seeing more people of color and women of color in healthcare professions, that feels also dangerous in a completely different way outside of the abortion issue, right? There's other health issues that come up that's like, if I'm not going to see somebody who makes me feel safe, I'm not going to go to the doctor, and then my health is going to go downhill, and it's just the spiral. But Megan, you can speak better to that than I can, but I'm glad you brought that up, because I saw that article this weekend and I was like, wow, I hadn't even thought about that effect.
Yep, there's so many things that people don't even know will come about as a result of this. Thank you, Dana, for highlighting your own experience. I think that's right on the money. We're going to lose medical professionals because they cannot practice. And that just is going to have effects for years to come.
Yeah, and I think when I think about going to the doctor in Wilmington, North Carolina, like, there are no women of color who are OBGYNs. Like, they don't exist here. There is one, Dr. Amilda Odibo, but she is a high-risk OBGYN, right? And so even if, and studies also show that people of color in the healthcare industry provide a different level of service to their clients who are also people of color, right? So they take them more seriously. When they say they're in pain, they believe them. They don't have to give you a litany to prove it. So if there are already 0 here in Wilmington, like, that means that there may be 0, not even a high risk, in North Carolina. So to think about that this overturned decision will impact, like, just having a person of color who's a doctor is blowing my mind in this moment. Because I read the stats, but to hear you say, no, like, I could not have a doctor because of the laws is scary.
Sorry, I was gonna say, let's think about like the other services that these medical providers also give. It's not just abortion care, it's also routine pregnancies and deliveries, access to long-term birth control options or contraceptives, screening and treatment for STIs, for cancers, especially in rural areas or areas like Washington. This is so important. It goes, again, beyond just the abortion topic. It's so many other things as well. And it's very scary to think that we're going to be losing those folks.
Yeah. And I think the one thing, I have given birth, I have one child, and as someone who has given birth, it is not for the weary. It is. I mean, I will say I grew up watching the Baby Story. I don't know if y'all ever seen the Baby Story. It used to come on TLC, right? And it's these ladies, and they live in these beautiful houses, and they have all of this stuff, and they go into the doctor, and they're like, oh. And they're breathing, and then next thing you know, like here comes the baby, and it just seemed like such a beautiful experience. But as a person who has lived it, and as a person who was in labor for 3 days, okay, 3 days, 3 days, y'all, 3 days. I went into labor on Thursday. I did not give birth to my son until Saturday afternoon. I was in labor for 3 days. It blows my mind that somebody wants to make that decision for me. They didn't get the stretch marks. They didn't have to go through all the testing, all the emotional ups and downs, the stretching. Like I ended up having, and I hope I'm not oversharing, but I ended up having to have a cesarean because my son was too big. And so like to even go through that of being rushed in the back and having to be cut open from like one side to the other, like these decisions and that decision between myself and my husband, that even like to fathom that now those things are questioned, not just by us or by the village who's helping to raise him, but by the government is a point of frustration. Like, and there may be women out there who had a beautiful, wonderful birth story, and I applaud you. I just wasn't one of them. And I also did not have to die in childbirth. Like some of the clients that I served here, where their grandparents are in a program because they died through childbirth. But I didn't have that experience either. I am not a child who had to grow up without a mother because my mother passed away during childbirth. There are other situations and circumstances that lead women to make these choices. Like our co-pays for health insurance. If you have 2 kids, you're looking at least $600 a month taken off the top of your check so you can have health insurance. That doesn't include feeding them. It doesn't include clothing them. It doesn't include sending them to college, which I mean, we're in a whole college student loan health crisis in itself. That doesn't include giving them a good quality education, keeping them safe. And when I think about my birthing story, and even my husband, he will say it. He's like, "Oh, I will never tell you what to do with your body after having watching you go through what you went through for three days. Zachary, you better love me your whole life." But I'm laughing. But in all seriousness, like I think sometimes we fetishize and we glamorize what it is like for a woman to be pregnant, what it's like for a birthing person to carry a child and to go through labor. I think we fetishize it, but like it is a serious, serious situation, even miscarriages, having ectopic pregnancies, being pregnant with non-viable babies, or, women who've gone through multiple miscarriages, having stillbirth babies. Like there are a lot of other things that we should be thinking about when we're making these decisions. And I just don't think that those conversations should be happening in the Supreme Court or should be happening in court. They really should be happening between a woman and her doctor, or between a person and their doctor, a person in their village, but it should not be a law. And I'm very proud to work for an organization who agrees and who stands by that. And so in our last few minutes, I will let you kind of, both of you kind of wrap up, or if there was a question you didn't get to answer that you would like to answer, or something you would like to share with the audience, I will let you share it, and then I will come back for closing remarks.
Yeah, I can go. One thing I like to mention when having this conversation is the fact that well, right now in North Carolina, abortion is still legal up to a certain amount, or I think it's 20 weeks is what we're legal right now in North Carolina. But regardless of what happens going forward, abortion is not going to stop, even if it does become illegal across the country. As we mentioned to start the conversation, women have been figuring out, and birthing people have been figuring out ways to terminate pregnancies since the beginning of time, really. But what will end is safe abortions if this continues going forward. And so that's why it's so important, again, as a health educator and someone that's trying to empower our students and others in our community on making the best decisions for themselves. It's just to know that there are resources out there. There are people like us who are willing to have conversations to answer questions. Again, working with the college population, for many of them, this is the first time anyone has taken interest in teaching them about their health beyond, how to exercise or something, how to eat well, but actually going into sexual health, reproductive rights, reproductive justice. So for those who are students or faculty staff here at UNCW, I'd just like to highlight that our Health Education Center is here to help answer questions. We do have our Student Health Center on campus as well that can help refer out if needed to any community resources. But we all do have a stake in this topic. Again, it's not just women and birthing people, it's all of us. So again, thank you, Janiqua, for inviting me today, and I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, I echo all that. Thanks for having us here. This has been fantastic. I love getting into intellectual conversations that stay civil and, open our minds and make us think about things. It's been really joyful learning from both of you two and hearing your personal stories and your backgrounds. Just in terms of what we do at the center, so the Gender Studies and Research Center, yes, is primarily for the university, but we also have been out in the community and we have a lot of community partnerships, right? We work with the YWCA, we've got a long history with that. We've got a long history of working with DVSS, with AAUW. So, we expand outside community and hope that we can bridge the community. That was actually our theme last year, but, and thinking of the things that we can do, that my center, we put out a statement to let students and community members know how we can support you. Well, it's not our job in this center at the university to change your minds politically one way or the other. Our job is to educate. So, if you want to come to the center and hang out, we can educate, chat about Roe versus Wade. What does this mean? What did it mean before? What does it mean now? We can have deeper conversations in this way. If people need assistance in understanding their reproductive rights here in North Carolina, or maybe when they go home to where they, are from, we have students who aren't from here, how can we support you in that way? We certainly can talk to folks about exercising their right to vote and what that looks like to do that responsibly, not thinking about political parties, but thinking about just thinking for yourself. And we have a lot of health services here on campus. We have the CARE office, we have Title IX office, we have, health promotion, my office, the LGBTQ center, that can all support our students for their mental health and well-being, because all of this takes a toll. Also, I think we often forget about that piece, is take time to breathe and really reflect and understand how this is affecting you. And if you need support for your mental well-being, to reach out. And there are lots of places on campus. If you can't find one, come to our center. We're happy to direct you in the right way or just sit with you, because this can be heavy too. And we need to keep our mental health cared for as we go through this, because social justice work isn't done and it's hard work. And we need to have strong mental health, and we can do that when we're coming together. And so that's another piece that we can offer here in our center, but also provide you resources at the university and in the community and beyond.
Well, thank you so much, Megan, and thank you so much, Dana. Y'all are beautiful, beautiful, brilliant people. And I just feel privileged to be able to share this space and time. I would also like to thank the Advocacy and Racial Justice Committee here at the YWCA Lower Cape Fear, who really leads in all of these efforts. And then, of course, Velva Jenkins, who is our CEO here at our local YWCA, Lower Cape Fear. Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope everybody has a great day. We'll see you in person on October 20th for Talk on Race. Have a good day. And Dana and Megan, please stay.
Thanks, y'all.